Hi, it's Sheridan Webb here from the Training Designers Club, which is the place to go for practical L&D support, especially if you work on your own. And today I'm going to be talking around a question that does land quite frequently in our VIP community and more generally in various forms. And that is, how can I cover all the content required in the time available? It's a perennial problem that just never seems to go away. And I'd love to tell you that I had a magic wand, and if you do these three things, it will all be sorted. But we know that that isn't quite the case. So why do we have this problem? Quite often the problem just comes from our senior stakeholders, whether it's the senior leadership team or your client. They seem to think that content equals quality. And we know that that isn't necessarily the case. And even if you're freelance and you're working with an L&D manager who understands that too, they are being put under pressure from their senior leadership team to actually cram as much into the time available as is humanly possible. If we're going to take people off the job, then let's just stuff them full of useful information so that we get maximum value out of that time. So when faced with this problem, I think obviously the first thing to do is to gently push back and try and educate your stakeholders that actually more isn't always better. But I do know that that can be a challenge. So we have to kind of find a compromise somewhere along the way. And one of the things that I often find when people come to me with this question is that they've started with or got to the what of training too quickly. So almost immediately their brain has gone into what do I need to cover? And then we're going down content rabbit holes. The best place to start is, of course, with why. Why do we need to do this training? What has triggered this request? Why now? Who is it for? What is it that needs to change specifically rather than what do we need to let people know? So, what's the problem that we're solving? What are the frustrations that we're removing? What are the opportunities that we need to capitalize on? Because they're the things that are actually going to speak to people rather than just saying we're going to learn about A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and all the rest of it. By focusing on what needs to change in behaviour, I think that immediately starts to help us to cut away some of the clutter. And whilst I'm on this, having a clear aim, a behavioural objective for the training, I think is far more useful than having a list of learning outcomes. Don't get me wrong, learning outcomes have their place, but they're quite passive and they are more for you as a designer to actually structure your session. They're not as enticing to the end user or your senior stakeholders. What they want to know is, what will this training actually do for me? How will it make my life easier? How will it improve my performance? So that is where we need to start. It's also really important to look at the learning from the end user's perspective. I don't like the term learner, but I'm going to use the term learner just because it's shorter. But what do learners get from doing this training? Because ultimately, if they're not motivated to work through that e-learning module or attend that course, nothing's going to change anyway. So what's in it for them? And start there. Not saying that we should dismiss the business objectives. Clearly, they're really important, but let's start with what the end user is going to get, what the learner is going to get, and then link that to the business objectives. And if you imagine that as a Venn diagram where there's overlap or where we can make clear links, again, that's going to be the sweet spot for the content of your workshop. So once we've got that guiding star, that's when I think the 80-20 rule is never ever going to let you down. So what is the 20% of content that's going to give you 80% of the results you need? And this is what you include in your training. All of the other things that are nice to know, that we could know, that we find fascinating, are just going to overwhelm and confuse. If there's an opportunity to cover some of those things, then you can always do them as optional modules, as optional self-study, or as recommended reading or signposts if people want to learn more. But honestly, when we're challenged with covering so much content in such a short amount of time, keeping that content to the core minimum, the stuff that's really going to add value, I think is absolutely paramount. We really need to be mindful of cognitive load. When we cram too much in, people get very overwhelmed very quickly, especially if you're a subject matter expert. You don't appreciate how far out of someone's comfort zone you've already gone, because what you think is bread and butter, quite basic information, might actually be blowing their mind. So we need to keep it as simple as possible. We need to keep it practical and relevant. So let's not go down theoretical rabbit holes. And we need to keep that clear structure and focus, because if we throw in a huge amount of content and we're having to cover it quickly, we're going to very easily lose that focus and people will lose their way. And if they can't see a route through the content, if they can't see how it's actually going to all come together and benefit them, again, they're going to lose all of their attention. And no matter how good that content is, it's not going to have any impact whatsoever on the end users. So using accelerated learning techniques is always a piece of advice I would urge you to follow. It really does help you to cover things in an engaging way, in an efficient way, and it helps to make them practical as well. Because when we're going through learning, if we want that learning to be effective, there has to be a small struggle in there, a little friction. If we just provide information that is so passive, nothing is going to stick. And I would question the extent to which we need to do that anyway these days. I mean, Google exists. The internet is absolutely chock full of every piece of information anybody could want to know. What people are going to really want from their L&D is how to actually apply that knowledge. What does it mean to them? They need to filter out all of the noise. They need it to be personalized. They need it to be practical. So rather than focusing on telling people more information, let's make the training focus on translating that information into something they can actually do something with. And that means helping them to see how to apply it back in the workplace as well. So if people can go away from your training session being really clear about what they need to do and how they need to do it, and have the confidence that they are going to be able to do it because they've really thought it through, and maybe they've had the opportunity to practice as well in a safe environment, the impact of that learning is going to be so much greater than if we've just bombarded them with loads of really interesting but actually superfluous information. So, in conclusion, how on earth am I going to cover all of the content required in the time available? Firstly, be clear about what content is actually required and keep it to the minimum possible. So cover fewer things, but cover them in more depth, cover them in more ways, and cover them in a way that's going to be super practical and helpful to the end users so that they've got the confidence to actually go out there and apply what they're learning and make a difference back at work. For more ideas, suggestions, and my thoughts on what makes great training design, do check out the rest of the YouTube channel, in particular these Dear Training Designers Club videos. There's also the website, which has lots of free and low-cost resources on it. Just visit www.trainingdesignersclub.co.uk. And there's also a podcast that you might like to listen to, as well as a vibrant and supportive VIP community that can be on hand to help you with all of your design challenges whenever you face them.